Well, my name's Kent Hughes. I run a program at the Woodrow Wilson Center that focuses on, among other things, the long-run future of the American economy. And when people ask us, a lot of strengths there, venture capital, entrepreneurship, any weaknesses in the American economy, almost everyone brings up K through 12 education in general and STEM education in particular. Well, before we launch into our program today, I want to thank our co-sponsors. The LBJ School has been very helpful to us, arranged here for the Alumni Center. We're in the Legends Room. Kind of makes me wonder if it would have been better in life had I been able to go to UT myself. And we particularly want to thank National Instruments, who's been such a supporter of STEM education, of FIRST robotics, and beyond that, of course, this enormous contribution to innovation in the country. The tools that they've created have fostered innovation all around the country. In fact, you'd have to say all around the world. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I just want to recognize some of the notables that are here, starting really with NI. We're very pleased to have James Trouchard, who I understand I should refer to as Dr. T, and Jeff Kodosky. These are the two co-founders of NI. I don't know if Robert Hutchings here. He's the dean of the LBJ School and was at one point a fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center. And when one of our number at the center spent 2 years on the National Security Council, Robert really managed that portfolio. So really a thanks go out to him as well. And I certainly wanted to recognize State Representative Donna Howard. Please stand up and wave to the crowd. And I'm also pleased that we have two people representing very prominent members of the U.S. Congress. We have Susan Heckman, who community liaison for Congressman Lamar Smith. Delighted to have you here. And Sandy Edwards, who was here. Oh, there you are, Sandy, who represents Senator John Cornyn. So we've got a real mixed private sector, powerful public sector. These are the partnerships that are supposed to drive the future. Let me take one more second for those of you who are new to the Wilson Center to give you a little of the history. As you may know, Woodrow Wilson was the only president who had a PhD. In his era, he was a very prominent political scientist, went on to be president of Princeton, governor of New Jersey, and then a two-term president. When Congress wanted to honor him, they decided against another monument or marble statue on the Mall in Washington and created the Wilson Center as a living memorial. And the assignment they've given us was to capture both sides of his life, the academic side and the policy-making side. So we try to bring together the people from politics, from business, and the academic world, people who are doing the best thinking about public policy, and those people that are having an enormous impact on public policy. Over the course of a year, we'll have 150 people come to the Wilson Center to do some kind of research on public policy. And we have their programs that really cover every single region of the world, and then programs like my own that look at globalization and innovation and competitiveness that really cut across these regions. Well, it is now my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker and longtime friend, Dean Kamen. Dean, come on up. Dean, as I think you know, is an extraordinary inventor, entrepreneur. There's such a long list of his inventions: a portable dialysis machine, insulin pumps, treatments for lymphoma. We used to talk about Senator Moynihan as having written more books than most of us have read. And Dean has invented more useful things in the medical world than you can really list without taking up a whole program. Lots of awards. He, among many, the one I guess I was always most impressed with was the National Medal of Technology. And although this is how you usually see Dean, I can tell you I have seen him in a tuxedo when he got that medal. He is also the founder of FIRST Robotics, which started in a small gym in Manchester, New Hampshire, a little more than 20 years ago, 28 teams. It has now spread all across the country. There are thousands of high school teams. There are probably 15,000 Lego League teams for middle school or more. He has inspired more than 100,000 volunteers that really help drive this program. And if you have any interest in education at all, he's going to twist your arm and get you involved in FIRST Robotics. Dean, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I do have some, as the people in education say, visual aids. But I'm not sure how they're organized, so we'll be surprised together. We just moved this thing over, and I hope it works. Normally when I'm asked to go talk at some event, they ask me to talk about something specific that they care about. And I always want to shamelessly grovel and beg for support for FIRST. So I do a little bit of whatever it is that I'm asked to do, and then I talk about FIRST. In this case, I don't know.
Our videographer wants to move you to the podium.
To the podium. I'm at the podium.
This is the only time I've ever got Dean to do anything.
Anyway, with this eclectic crowd, I'm not sure what else to do other than just jump into FIRST. It's about education, so I have to tell you that my context for being here was very simple. Kent Hughes is being very modest. He not only was there in the first year we did FIRST, when FIRST was still one of Dean's crazy ideas, and I've got lots of crazy ideas, most of them crash and burn, so the world doesn't get to see them, and I look smart because they only see the ones that actually. But the percentage that actually get out to the world is dismally low. But Kent Hughes helped create that first group of something like 28 teams when we started FIRST, because he at the time was president of the United States Council on Competitiveness, proving that even 20 some odd years ago, there were people that were worried about the future of this country and our competitiveness. And I think they were right to be worried. And you'd be right to be worried too. The only other reason I'm here is probably the same reason a lot of you are here. National Instruments. Dr. T, Jeff, you couldn't begin to know, and I'd seem like I'm patronizing them if I really told you their relative commitment to FIRST versus lots of other companies. And we have enormous companies, 3,500 corporate sponsors, and all the biggest ones. I mean, Google sponsors whole regionals, and Microsoft and Intel and all the big pharma companies. J&J sponsors entire regions, United Technologies. Across the country, we have every Fortune 500 technology company after 20 years involved. But even among the giants, as I think I'll show you, the commitments of National Instruments to make FIRST what it is today and keep it exciting, I think is staggering. And I think no matter how much you've done in other areas, no matter how much today's NI is helping people develop control systems, robots, the seed corn in the literally now thousands of schools that we are putting your stuff is going to create a generation of capable innovators that will be the best legacy you have created. Not today's products, but we'll see. Anyway, since it's about education, I'll now start, as I would always, with my disclaimer, but here it matters more because I'm sure there really are educators here, and since there are really big policy people here, I'll start by making two simple observations. I'm not a policy person, and I'm not an educator. I make stuff. I don't talk about it, I make it. And one of the things I made after making an observation about a problem was FIRST. And you'll notice up in the corner of these things, there's a hackneyed old statement in this culture of ours. Everything's about supply and demand, supply and demand, supply and demand. And we think capitalism, supply and demand. And we all say we love capitalism. It's good. It's competition. It raises the bar. More than 20 years ago, the National Academies put out one of their statements, policies, and it was called A Nation at Risk. And it was a very compelling set of observations about what was happening to kids in the late 80s relative to kids around the world in terms of how this country's doing. And they basically said if we don't dramatically change the course of a generation of kids, this country is going to lose what everybody's taken for granted. We've always led the world in standard of living, quality of life, and it's always because of innovators and technology. It wasn't a birthright. America sort of came from people that were willing to take risks. They came to this place. And I think the culture of America drove this kind of entrepreneurship, risk-taking, hard work. But, you know, a few generations of being very rich and very comfortable, it's not surprising, it happens all the time, left America by the 80s with our kids certainly less focused than kids around the world whose parents saw this vision of, yeah, we get it. We know why America has clean water and electricity, because they have smart people that have mastered technology. They've commoditized most of the things that the rest of the world can't even find every day, like water to drink. Anyway, they don't put it in those terms. They put it in, I don't want to make fun of them, but the policy terms. And they concluded we need more teachers, more standards, more, the litany of stuff. I read that report, and I thought, frankly, maybe you need all that, and I'm not here to say we want bigger classes with more kids and less money. Of course, all that stuff could be good. But I looked at all that and said, that can't be it. And I think, what do innovators do? Innovators look at the same problems everybody else look at, but they see them differently. And I said, let's take the hypothetical. It's not at all about supply and demand. It's not supply. Our kids can't be so dramatically, dismally outperforming, underperforming the rest of the world because of supply. We're the richest country in the world. These kids are immersed in all the technology. They have time. They have security. They got light. They got heat. They don't worry about dying from drinking water. So I said, make the bold assumption, it's not about supply. That's a distraction. More this, more that, more that. Let's put the problem on its head. It's not supply and demand. Just state it differently. And is a conjunction. I don't know. It's about demand and supply. Assume that we do not have the education crisis that everybody assumed we had in the 80s, and assumes even more so we have today. Assume it's not an education crisis. It's a culture crisis. We now have a culture that doesn't value that hard work, that risk-taking, that education. And it's not a supply problem at all. It's a demand problem. It's not what we don't have enough of relative to the rest of the world, because we have more of everything than the rest of the world. It's not we don't have enough. It's what we have too much of. Distractions that make it impossible for our kids to focus. We've created a culture in which kids, particularly women and minorities, from the time they're small, are somehow convinced science and technology, it's for nerds. It's not glamorous, it's not exciting, it's not fun, it's not even accessible. To minorities, they make it seem unaccessible. To girls, they make it seem unattractive. You never see science and technology in a very positive way, not in the culture, not in the movies. It's just not covered. And if they do, every once in a while, put science or engineering in a movie, the scientist is always the middle-aged white male, frizzy-haired, German accent sociopath out to destroy the world. And if it's a young kid who's a math or science person, it's a geeky, squeaky, less than attractive person. Well, it's easy to make the cheap jokes, but it has consequences. In a free society, you get what you celebrate. And in this society, we celebrate two things to obsession. Sports, look across the street, and entertainment. We celebrate them to obsession, because we can, because we're rich. But the consequence of that is we're pretty good globally in sports, and we lead the world in entertainment. It's one of our few still remaining exports. The trouble is sports and entertainment, which used to be the national pastime, as they become a national obsession, the consequence is we've gotten real good at those, but we're not good at some of the other things. And it's those other things that will determine the quality of life, the standard of living, the health care, the security. And therein lies a rub. Well, so I'm sitting there and saying, if you restate it as it's about demand, not supply, if you say it's not, don't blame the teachers. That's easy to do. By the way, my mother's a teacher, and she ended her career as a principal in a New York high school. She's very dedicated. Most of the teachers I've met are very dedicated to education, because why else would they do that? You don't make a lot of money. It's not very prestigious. In any event, I said, it's easy to play the blame game. That's another thing we've become expert at this country, more so recently than ever. Blame somebody for something, find an easy slogan, fix, and move on. But, so back then I said, if you believe that we're obsessed with sports and kids will become expert at what they're passionate about and we get the best of what we celebrate, let everybody else work on the supply side, the policy guys, more teachers. More. I said, no, we'll just form an organization whose singular goal is change the culture of the United States. It seemed like a good idea, and it seemed like it ought to be relatively easy. We now have a media-driven culture. I said, all we got to do is, and they've given us the roadmap, it's sports and it's entertainment. Let's just take science and technology and make it a great sport and make it entertaining. And then kids will gravitate to it, they'll put their passion into it, and the rest of these problems will go away. It was like one of those epiphanies, simple, except it had a couple of rubs. Kids will only play a sport where they can see a progression to being a superstar. So if I made anything to go into schools and it was kids doing what other kids do or what teachers tell them to do, at best it'll be another among the plethora of science fairs. Little nerdy kids looking at each other's plastic paramecium on the folding bridge table in the basement of the middle school, and then they go back and look at $1 million a minute production of the halftime show at the Super Bowl. We can't compete with that in the 21st century. It's craziness. I said, no, we're going to form an organization. It's not going to compete with science fairs. We're going to compete with the Super Bowl. We're going to compete for the hearts and minds of kids. But to do that, I need superstars. I got to have the superstars because that's what kids respond to. That's what our culture responds to. And so I made this instant leap that, well, since all the really cool people in this country happen to be scientists and engineers, you could argue with that perhaps, but I mean, people that, let's go put a man on the moon. I mean, let's blast me. When you think about what we do, let's make a computer. I mean, technology is really cool. It's just out of reach. And I figured I can probably go to places where there are world-class people that do science and technology that don't fit the stereotype. In fact, I can find young, attractive men and young, attractive women of every color and every size that are as proud of being scientists and engineers and inventors as there are people that are proud of bounce, 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 throw. And I said, if I put those people in an environment that's as attractive to kids as sports, we're going to win. But I needed to get to those people. That's where Kent Hughes came in, by the way, in the council. They were wringing their hands like everybody else. We got to fix this problem. And I went to see him and said, here's the plan. We're going to make a sport. But I need the NFL or the NBA. I need the superstars. You've got them, and we're going to let them work with these kids. But when you think of how deviously effective sports is, it's hard to do. They dumb it down so that any kid, even at 5 years old, they watch the World Series, they watch super athletes hit a ball. They get to play at 5 years old T-ball. But in their mind, this is baseball. The ball's standing still and it's big, you can hit it. And they let them progress in an incredibly effective way where they get positive feedback and they always have these aspirational superstars. It takes them 10 or 12 years to develop these eye-hand coordination, but there's rewards and recognition and school bands and trophies. It's attractive, right? Then they go to school, first learn numbers, then counting, then arithmetic, then multiplication, then algebra, then trigonometry, then calculus. Really? When's the last time you went to a grocery store and had to figure out the cosine? So it's hard. It's not relevant. There are no heroes. There's no obvious reason why you're doing it. Kids wouldn't whack away at a T-ball They wouldn't bounce a basketball all day. Think about this. I said, okay, so sports, they don't get grades in that class. By the way, every time I talk to people about the sports model and you say, you know, we justify, they get defensive. Dean, you know, sports are very important in school, you know, because kids, they learn teamwork there. That's the best they can come up with. It's not a skill set. They learn teamwork. Yeah, you're right. So if teamwork is so important for all you people that want to fix education, then why, when they do it in a classroom, do you call it cheating? But why is the football coach or the best? It's this nurturing person that helps you do better next time if you strike out. Whereas in class, oh, you got a D or an F. Here they're nurturing, here they're judgmental, here. And I just looked at it and said, no wonder we have what we have. Too much distraction. And by the way, if you think it's too much distraction, think of what some of the big companies tell kids every day in their ads. It's not even implicit anymore what's important in America. Think of the jingles that they see on the internet everywhere. You deserve a break today. Do you think the chairman of that company's father or mother ever walked into his room when he was studying at 14 and says, close that textbook, you deserve a break today? And then they wear shirts, life is short, play hard. How about life is short, work hard? It's going to get a lot shorter. But you can't beat this cultural system. We're immersed in it. So, what do? You form an organization, and since we said it's not about education, the word first doesn't have the word education in it. It's for inspiration and recognition of science and technology. You inspire kids, you get them to recognize science and technology, they'll leverage the $800 billion a year you're spending in public education, particularly the ones that aren't going at all. It'll preferentially go towards the women and the minorities that are falling off the bus. So I formed FIRST because it's about sports. I never heard kids walking around cheering, I want to be second. And although they'll take math pass fail, or they won't take physics at all, what's the big deal? And I was going to use like 5 interlocking degenerate shapes like circles, but somebody took that one, and I decided I'd put more interesting fundamental geometries together. Actually, my father, the artist, helped me do that, and we formed FIRST. And I said, we are going to use the playbook of sports to create an environment where kids are going to get so jazzed up in a very short time, one season, it'll change their self-image and what they do. So I have to make it a really fun sport. But I needed world-class scientists and engineers in front of kids. That, I thought, would be the hard part. I didn't know that you give people like James and Jeff a challenge, and they rise to it. So, in 1992, it took me a year to do this, by the way. In 1992, I had collected 28 teams. You were not one of them. Didn't know you guys. It took me a whole year, and I had to go across the country. There were only 28, but they were the right companies. You know, Boeing. You know, I mean, it was like 28 of the biggest technology companies. They were mostly his members at the council. And I said, if you want to change education, what do you know about teaching? Let the teachers teach. That ain't our problem. You know how to do. You know how to create demand. You have marketing. You know how. Let the big companies, let the people that care about the future of science and technology organize to promote something that actually has real content. But do it in a way that it's aspirational, after school, fun, because it'll get the kids interested. And 28 companies rose to the occasion. A couple of the CEOs at that meeting looked at me and said, if you think you can make learning math and science fun, if you think they'll show up with cheerleaders and school bands at an event with that, and you think in 6 weeks, I'm in. They were very skeptical, to say the least, but I'm a pain, and I think it was easier to say we'll give it a try than it was to argue. And so I left Washington, ran back to New Hampshire, went into my little shop and built 28 kits of parts. They'd fit in a shoebox. It was donated junk, pieces of old printers. It didn't matter. Bearings. We didn't have really cool computational stuff, switches. And I gave 28 kits out, and again, in this sporting mentality, I gave them all out the first week in January. And I told everybody, you got 6 weeks, a short, intense season. All you companies, go adopt a school any way you want. I'm not big on structure, on policy. I gave you a pile of junk. You're going to turn it into a working robot. I showed them on that day in January, here's your playing field. It's a 12-foot by 12-foot about the size of this stage, actually. I'm going to fill it up with a few hundred tennis balls. There's going to be 4 of you teams, 1 on each side. I'm going to start a clock. Your robot under manual control, we didn't have radio back then, is going to have to go out, and compete with all the others. Gave them a size limitation. And whoever gets the most balls in each 2-minute round wins. We'll have a double elimination tournament. You got to work with these kids and make something. And don't adopt a school where all your yuppie kids are choosing by the time they're 10 years old between, law school. Go to the schools where kids have never met a scientist or an engineer. They think an engineer is somebody that drives a train. So they all left. We had no control. Who did they adopt? How did they do it? How much work did they do to the kids? Didn't know. We just said, you can't kid a kid, so we want you to have passionate scientists and engineers from your organization be the ones that work with these kids. We're not asking them to teach. Nobody asked Shaquille O'Neal to teach basketball. But he has way more impact on kids than the entire United States Department of Education, because every kid in this country knows who Shaquille O'Neal is, and nobody knows who the Secretary of Education is, and nobody cares. Sorry to tell you that. So your people just have to be Shaquille or LeBron James. Go have a good time. The kids will see it. They'll work with you. They left. So what happened? 6 weeks later, in the middle of February, the planes are coming in from all over the country. And they got parents on them, teachers, kids, school bands, cheerleaders, and the teams with their proud little creations. And in a makeshift Superdome, in a high school gym in Manchester where one Kent Hughes was a judge, we ran an event. The end of the day, that was a 1-day-long season. It was the season, it was the playoffs, and it was the championship. I think Xerox. But it was great. And I walk in, and 4 or 5 of the CEOs, thanks to them, of these Fortune 50 companies are there. I'll never forget this one down moment. I walk into the makeshift VIP lounge, the teacher's cafeteria, and I said, what do you guys think? And it was mostly guys. And one of them looks right at me and said, Dean, you lied to us. Trust me, I know I'm a pain in the ass. I don't lie to anybody. He says, you lied to us. And they're all standing there. He said, yeah, you said it would be nights and weekends for a couple of our engineers. By the end of week 2, we realized it was going to be all night and all weekend if we were going to turn this pile of junk into something that worked. And with my company logo on it, I wasn't going to let Hewlett-Packard or GE. And one by one, they all say, yeah, we did the same thing. And now they're all laughing and they're all committed. These are competitive people. And believe it or not, despite what educational reforms would say, kids are competitive. And they ought to be competitive. And they can handle it. So he starts to laugh. He says, you lied to us because you didn't tell us it wasn't about building robots. These kids in 6 weeks, they're not going to learn robotics. I knew that, no pun intended. The robot was just a vehicle, an excuse. He said, Dean, these kids, you could watch them. They learn self-respect. They learn what matters. We watch their perspective about what's possible change. And you could tell, and one of the CEOs said, our engineers got more out of it than the kids. The teamwork, they're community heroes, they're engaged, they see that they can have an impact. So I said to them all, okay, that sounds like you'd come back next year. How many of them agreed to come back? All of them. I said, well, you're all on the boards of other big companies. Bring your friends. There's more than 28 schools in this country where kids need a different vision of what the world's really about. Most of you would like to have companies with this growth. The next year we had like 60 teams. The next year 150 teams. By the 5th year, it's a tradition. The fields get bigger, more cool stuff. Still didn't have any nice stuff, but cooler stuff. We had radios. Motorola was giving us stuff. Bigger fields. But by the 5th year, we had to tell them we're breaking with tradition. We still have our kickoff in New Hampshire, but you can't come back. We outgrew the gym. We outgrew this. We outgrew the university. We outgrew this. There's no venue left in the state of New Hampshire that can hold you people. So we've got another corporate sponsor that understands kids and entertainment. It's a little company in Florida called Disney. And they're building us the Olympic Village of Technology. We're going to hold our championship. We're going to Disney at Epcot. And we did that. And after 6 or 7 years of doubling and redoubling, the president at Disney comes to me and said, Dean, you've doubled every year. We built you the largest arena we've ever built for a 3-day event last year, 20,000 people. We can't double again. I said, you're trying to tell me I just outgrew the largest entertainment company in the world with a science and engineering? I said, well, we'll make you a super regional, because by then we were doing regionals around the country, but we'll do the championship in Texas at the Houston Astrodome, which we did. Then we moved, for the last few years after that, 5 or 6 years, to, appropriately, the home of the 1996 Olympics, the Georgia Dome. Again, America gets the best of what we celebrate. We build monuments to what we celebrate. We built the Georgia Dome. And I am not against sports. I mean, shot putters have certainly improved my quality of life. But there's got to be more. But we moved there. And last year, we moved out of there because so many cities were competing to be our home and our host. We moved to the 70,000-seat arena under the arch in St. Louis. But the point of all of this, and you'll see the data, it's pretty fantastic. But each time we had to step up, it was, how do we keep this stuff so exciting it keeps kids' attention? And a 21st century kid that has literally every fact you ever need, literally at the end of their fingertips, is living in a world that's running at a pace that you march them into school, put them in neat rows like they did in a 19th century school. They sit there. Are you kidding me? We need to give them the coolest technology in the world if we want to compete with for their attention. They don't do the same other things. I mean, again, I know that you think the analogy is bad. A lot of people get offended by it, especially in front of a sports arena. And you could say, well, we can blame the teachers. So let me ask you to do the hypothetical. Just do this as a hypothetical. The U.S. determines this year education. We don't have an education shortage. We have a critical cricket shortage. Cricket. We've just realized that the United States doesn't have world-class cricket players. And they're going to add that to, for instance, the Olympics, or Coca-Cola, what they did for soccer by creating the World Cup. There's going to be cricket. Let's say that's our crisis, okay? Well, we go to Washington, they would develop the cricket curriculum. That would take 10 to 20 years, top down. Then they'd start working on the remedial cricket curriculum. Then they'd get it out to the states, to the cities, because remember, education is very local. Then they'd get to the teacher, the people we all love to blame, and there'd be a very earnest teacher in one of the schools around here, very earnest, who would take his or her summer, what we'd say, and study that book and read the rules of cricket and look at the stuff, and they would work as hard as they could. And they'd get to September and they would teach the cricket class the way they teach physics for 45 minutes once a week at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then you can go do a study and you could ask, how's it going? And I think most of the people in this room would agree with me if you found the following. The teacher would say to you, and this is a good teacher, I'm doing the best I can. I read the books, I know the rules, I'm doing the best I can, but you need to understand, I didn't grow up with this. I don't really have a passion for it. Most of the kids don't show up to that class, and when they do, they're not paying attention. And then those kids who don't put much effort into this and don't care, go out after school, and they spend 3 hours every single day trying to get on the varsity basketball, baseball, or football team. You think they're going to be good at cricket. And who do you want to blame for that? If we wanted great cricket players, all we'd have to do is have that stadium be full of professional cricket players, the top tier of which make $20 million a year. I think you'd all believe we can't expect teachers to make great cricket players, not in our culture and not in our country. Okay, how many of the people in this room believe that your kids are learning math and science from people that ever were professional mathematicians or scientists or ever got a patent or ever invented? They are to a lot of the things you're asking them to teach kids what a really good gym teacher would be as a cricket coach. So, don't ask the teachers to create the demand. The culture does that. The world-class companies do that. So the goal was, if I can put into every kit, every year, enough cool stuff that those engineers from all these companies want to come back, so that the kids will be dazzled by what they can do. If every year we get bigger and better, we will reach every kid and we will change their perspective. Now, jump to about 5 or 6 years ago. Even our technology, they're running on radio control stuff that, you know what, you can buy that for $39 at Radio Shack. We were going to fall off the edge. So I went to this little company, and because they make the coolest technology development tools, and they make the stuff that's perfect. If you got to build something in 6 weeks, you're not going to put a C-Rio in every product you ship around the world if you're making things by the millions, but you got to build one system, or you got to build a controller for a big machine. You use their software, you use their development environments, that's what they do. So they're perfect, except for one small thing. This is really high-performance hardware. It's easy to get software free, but these are thousands of dollars worth of stuff. And by then, I already had thousands of teams. So we go to NI, who's been a supporter for many years with a few teams, and say, we've got a great idea. Next year, we're not only making the kits bigger, we're going to get rid of the old stuff we gave them, and we're going to put your high-end hardware and give them your most current, powerful development software to every team. To which I hear, Dean, this is thousands of dollars, and incrementally for each new team, but you want to go back and give every team that the returning veterans, thousands of them? Yeah, I do. Well, what do you want to pay? How much of a discount? Hey, this is first. My favorite word is free. But Dean, there's going to be a lot of support. How are they going to learn how to use this stuff in 6 weeks? A lot of the engineers don't know this stuff. Yeah, that's how I'm going to get more engineers to want to do this. They're going to get something out of it. So I don't need just all your parts free. I need all of your technical support around the country free. And they did it. And it changed the kits, and it's been fantastic. And I realized you probably want to get on with other things, so what I'm going to do is just tell you, imagine, while they may be the poster child for what's great about America being willing to rise to the occasion when a problem is well-defined and the free market is allowed to respond, and passionate people, whether they do it as an engineer or they do it as a parent or they do it as a concerned citizen, they do it. Since I think you could think I'm making some of this up, I'm going to, since I've probably said everything to these slides, I'm going to give you just the fastest pictorial review of First you've ever seen, with a fun one at the end of a couple of great Texas people that happen to end up being the presidents of the United States. And then a video, literally, the voice of God, because he's going to tell you to get involved, and you have to listen to the voice of God. So we've talked about why we call it First. It is about creating demand. It is about inspiration. And here's a guy in 1992 from Texas, standing in the lobby of my old mill building in Manchester at the very first kickoff. And I said, Mr. President, all we want you to do, all we want the government to do, all we want Department of Education, every year, Mr. President, since I can remember, the President of the United States throws out the first ball of the baseball season. Every year you invite the winners of the great sporting events, the Super Bowl, to the White House. The public, in particular kids, always see that. That's a powerful message about what's important. You, Mr. President, are going to commit today to bring the winners of our event to the White House. What else can I offer a Fortune 50 company? And he agreed to do that, and it started a tradition, and every year since, every president's done the same. 6 weeks after that picture was done, here we are. That's our little 12-foot field. That's little shoe-butt-sized robots. Everybody in the world that knew it first is in this room. It's still one of Dean's crazy ideas, but it's starting to be, this might work. The next year, we get a new president. He's in the Rose Garden with all our winners. And yep, he loved the T-shirt. I said, Mr. President, you're like everybody else. You got to help first. I'm glad you love the T-shirt. They're $15. He paid for it. We outgrow our little home, and we're at Epcot, as I mentioned. A few years later, in 2002, we have to tell Disney we're outgrowing them. We're not coming back the following year. They shut down the park that night and gave us the biggest farewell party in the history of Epcot. The next year, these robots are up to 80, 90 pounds, and we're here at the Houston Astrodome. By now, they're getting to be 100, 120 pounds, and we're in the home of the Olympics. By 2011, we, for the first time, leave, and we're in the Giant Dome in St. Louis. This is what it looks like in the pits. This is what kids think about math, science, and technology. Well over 30% of the women on these teams are women and minorities. They're the future of the country. They're the future of the workforce. They better be as good at technology as they can be. If you want to get worried about global, once South Korea saw First Works, they're an organized structure. The following year, they had 500 Lego League teams. South Korea. They sent their winning teams from Korea here, and they won that level of competition. We now have an intermediate level, halfway between Lego League and the robotics. We have teams coming now from all over the world. I opened up my email a couple of years ago, just before right after the kickoff, and one of my guys is literally, we sent him to Africa to look for places to put water machines. That's another project. Crazy idea. I think all kids all over the world ought to have clean water. I opened up my email, and there's a picture attached. He took this with his cell phone. He said, Dean, I was driving down this dirt road in Ghana, and I saw this sign with your first logo. I went into the town. Turns out there's a big multinational company with a headquarters in Houston. You can imagine what kind of company it is. And they got a bunch of engineers that are assigned to be in Ghana. And they knew in January you always have your new kid, and they've been mentors, and they love this thing, so they called their colleagues back in Houston. They had them ship the kid over. They adopted a school here, and they told me they're going to see you in Atlanta this year. And they showed up. This is what our growth looks like. And if you think I'm making it up, a third party, the Ford Foundation, paid another third party famous for longitudinal social impact studies, Brandeis University, to do a 4-year study, and this is what they found. I mean, a 9 times, not 9%, a 9 times change in kids doing what they see the mentors doing, giving back. Among women and minorities, we multiplied by a factor of 4. I mean, we're not talking about small changes. Among minorities, we doubled the number of kids that have a new perspective. We had 131 universities last year. Now, companies, we know we get from them, but universities, they don't give you money, right? Okay. Now we tell universities, you want to put your name on a robot? You got to adopt a high school like the companies do. You got to get out there. But we're giving you access to the next generation, your seed corn. And you're sitting in a room with all these major corporate people for placement. You're the biggest short-term winner of all of FIRST. You can't compete unless we get at least one full 4-year scholarship. One of my biggest triumphs, I think, in all of FIRST is, because it's about a culture, is we now have universities giving scholarships to scholars. It's a really weird concept in America, but anything can happen. We gave out $14 million on the 27th of April last year. This year it'll be way higher than that. But we have 131 universities with teams. The data speaks for itself. Yep. President Bush, who we'll see later, not only brings high school level there, but he brings out T-ball. It's not Little League, it's Lego League, which, by the way, NI is helping us with all the software and integration. Literally, their stuff now operates in NXT bricks that 7-year-olds are playing with, and then as they get older, they graduate to the bigger stuff. Thank you, NI. Yep, you can chase the president around the White House, and no, the Secret Service has no sense of humor. This is one of my all-time funniest things, and then we're done. Every year since he left, we invite President Bush, 41. To come back. We invite Bill Clinton to come back. We invite Bush 43 to come back. And we ask the current president to bring the kids to the White House, which he's done. But a couple of years ago, 2008, I get a call. Dean, I know you invite me every year. I'm going to get to Atlanta this year. I must tell you, I didn't tell anybody, because I've come to learn one thing. Presidents are remarkably unreliable. And Well, you know, world stuff happens and they change. And I figured I don't want to disappoint people. So the whole event goes all day Friday. Eliminations are going on. 48 cities had finished their regionals, including a couple in Texas, throughout March Madness, 8, 9, 10 cities per weekend. But now we're at the Georgia Dome. And I get a call late that night. Dean, it's Friday, we had some of our big awards. They said, Dean, the president's going to be in late tonight. He'll be in the green room tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock, before opening ceremonies, before we start the championship. It's going to be great. I get down to the green room early in the morning. And it suddenly occurs to me, because I never really thought about it. The president is now in his early 80s. He hasn't seen first since that first year when it was in a high school gym, 16, 17 years earlier. Probably a lot's happened in his life since then. He might think, oh, it's science fair, as everybody. And he'll pull out the paper and start with the policy stuff or the whatever. And it'll be, these kids are jazzed up for the championship. They want the Star Spangled, do the national anthem, and it'll be embarrassing to them, embarrassing to him. So I'd walk over to him, Mr. President, I said, remember, and I was trying to, this is a really cool sporting event. And he still is very tall, very distinguished guy, and he kind of puts his hand on my shoulder and says, Dean, I remember how special first is. And he kind of winks like, okay. Well, with this, somebody comes into the green room and says, Dean, they're starting, we got to go. So we sneak out, get on back up on stage, and the lights come up. I said, hey, everybody, before we get started, I have a special guest. And by the way, for those of you that think we can have time, companies are 100 years old. You want to see how fast life changes for kids, and it's permanently changed if they get to 18 and don't have skills. Think about this. I'm standing there, and I realized he'd been 16, 17 years since he'd been here. I said, how many of the people in this room here, and we're at the Georgia Dome, we're looking up at 7 tiers, how many of you weren't born in 1992? And the place erupts. So if you think this is great, but you'll do it next year, in 2 years, or 3 years, urgency has no other meaning unless you're talking about. So I said, well, then you should know, all of you, that when this was still one of those Dean's crazy ideas, I asked a guy to give us a little help. Believe in the vision. And it was convenient that he did, because at the time he happened to be the President of the United States. And he's back today to see how you do it. With that, he walks up to the microphone. And of course, he gets an astounding applause, like all the mentors and sponsors actually know he was the President of the United States. And the kids are on. But he walks up to the podium, and he pulls out the paper. And I'm thinking no good will come from this. And he puts the paper down, but he literally looks up. And he says, wow, this is just like WWF. And the first thing that went through my mind was, did he have to pick that sport? And the second thing that went through my mind, and I'm sitting there, I was like, does he watch that crap? But I shouldn't have advanced it to that, but I don't know how to even make it go back. But get out of this thing. He's standing there, he says that, and he says, it's just like WWF, but with smart people. And the place then erupts, of course. He finishes, great remarks, he gets it, he couldn't have been bad, and he leaves. And then, sadly, this thing went ahead, but I go running through the pits, because it's now Saturday morning, and I got to thank the mentors and thank the sponsors. I got to thank everybody in the world out in the pits, because they're all going to leave soon. And I go by one of the pits, and Ken can tell you this. He's been a judge. And you go by any of these pits, and these kids are industriously always making all sorts of stuff and making up little goodie bags to give to all the judges to bribe them to win all the awards. And I go by one of the booths, and they have a button-making machine. And literally, I don't think the president had been gone for an hour, and I see a kid. He hands me this button. First, like WWF, but with smart people. George Herbert Walker Bush, team 1649. So I say, give me some of those buttons. So these kids give me a bunch of these buttons. The weekend ends. Sunday night, I go home, and I start trying to send my thank yous to everybody. And, of course, I send a note to the president, and I included a couple of these buttons. I said, Mr. President, that line has got staying power. In fact, it's such a great line that we'd like to offer you the position of Chief Marketing Officer for FIRST. I get a very nice note back from the president that's more or less, due to other commitments, sadly, I can't accept the offer. But I'm very proud of what FIRST has become, and you're welcome to use that line with attribution any way you want. So we do. Yes, the new president brings our kids to the White House. Yes, he believes you got to celebrate them like athletes, and this is the kid from Team 341 showing the president their robot in the White House. And then the last point, did we ever get to where we are part of the culture? Well, it was our 20th year last year, and a week before Christmas, they announced that 1 month later, at the Super Bowl done here in Texas, the big news was the halftime entertainment for the Super Bowl was going to be Will.i.am and the Black Eyed Peas. Now, if you don't think this country's obsessed with two things, sports and entertainment, ask yourself, we have the Super Bowl. It brings the country to its knees. But even the Super Bowl has to be interrupted by entertainment. But okay. So I talked to Will, and that's a long story, which we don't have time for right now. How can I help? I said, well, Will, I know how you can help. We're still not top of mind to a generation of kids. Every school that's got a FIRST team has been transformed by it, but we don't have a lot of awareness. You're going to be the halftime entertainment at one of those sporting events that maybe is not quite 21st century, but there's a lot of nostalgia in this country. But after you finish being the halftime entertainment for the collision sport, you could become the halftime entertainment for ours, a sport that's the future. He says, fine, I'll do it. And I'll bring the Black Eyed Peas, and I'll bring a lot of other celebrities, and then we'll also do an hour television special of it, which he went on the line for $4.5 million at his expense, and they produced and broadcast primetime national network television, ABC, 7 o'clock, Sunday night. Anyway, my big new announcement is I'm leaving my current job, and I'm joining Fergie and the Black Eyed Peas. Actually, another voice from the world of entertainment that's a credible voice, the voice of God. We also convinced to come last year, and he's there. And he said, Dean, I am going to give you a 3-minute piece that he basically said, I'll help you get the word out, and we can send it to every school and to every one of your potential new sponsors. And here it is.
This year marks best teams competed at the national championships in St. Louis, April 28th to the 30th. I'll be there, and I'm inviting you to join me at the Super Bowl of Smarts.
You made it shorter? As I said, I'd be surprised along with you.
This is the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl of Smarts, that is. It's a life-changing competition. It's kids having fun, competing, working together to dream up, design, and build robots.
It's just an exhilarating feeling. It's like I'm using power tools.
They're having the hardest fun they'll ever have. And they're becoming our next generation of engineers and innovators. First, come out! For inspiration and recognition of science and technology. My teachers were some of the greatest influences on my life. By challenging and trusting me, these mentors got me to understand that I could do anything I put my mind to. First mentors are changing kids' lives every day. Professional engineers, teachers, parents, teaming up with young people not just to build robots, but to build confidence and self-respect.
I'm around people that I can get along with, that we can talk computer lingo with.
FIRST was founded by one of our greatest inventors, Dean Kamen. Dean saw that kids mostly look up to sports heroes and movie stars.
So we said, if we've got a culture now that's obsessed with sports and entertainment, let's inspire these kids to be big thinkers the same way Shaquille O'Neal can inspire them to spend dozens of hours a week bouncing a ball.
Our president agrees.
Scientists and engineers ought to stand side by side with athletes and entertainers as role models. And here at the White House, we're going to lead by example. We're going to show young people how cool science can be.
250,000 kids aged 6 to 18 compete at all different levels. In 2 first Lego leagues, the first Tech Challenge. Then at the high school level, the first robotics competition.
The only difference between this sport and all the others is every kid on our teams can turn pro. There's a job out there for every one of these kids.
Students who take part in FIRST are 50% more likely to go to college and twice as likely to major in science or engineering.
I definitely know that I want to pursue engineering.
Once they've tasted what the power of knowledge is, that it can be fun and rewarding, they won't go back.
There's no doubt FIRST works.
10 or 15 or 20 years from today, some kid in those stands will have cured Alzheimer's or AIDS or cancer or built an engine that doesn't pollute. Look at these kids. They're the future.
I feel like I can go and do anything I want to do because of this program.
Someone took the time to guide and inspire me. It changed my life. Take some time. Go to usfirst.org.
You have to do what God tells you. So thank you for being there in the very first year and now bringing all of the leverage of the prestigious Woodrow Wilson Institute to focus entirely on FIRST. And thank you, National Instruments, for keeping your little company going so it can make sure that we can make every kid in this country capable of having a great future. Thank you.
Dean, unfortunately, has to rush off to Dallas. I think he'll be talking to one of the Presidents Bush there. And this is very much the Dean's life, and we're so lucky to have him here. And you can see how inspirational he is. And I guess I'm going to have to tell the CEO of the Wilson Center that we have a new assignment, that we've now been seconded to FIRST for almost all of our activities. Thank you, Dean. It was terrific. Well, I'm not sure if anything can top Dean Kamen, but this panel is definitely going to rise to a Kamen-like level. I have 2 or 3 questions I'm going to ask the panel, and then we will open it up for questions from this very erudite and highly educated gathering. I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order. I figured that was the most diplomatic approach, and coming from Washington, we're very politically sensitive, or so we like to think. To my immediate left is Ray Almgren, who I've gotten to know through FIRST. Ray is the Vice President of Marketing for Core Platforms at National Instruments. He has made a real mark by promoting the use of the LabVIEW program. He also is very engaged in outreach to education, higher education, and really education at all levels. And that really, I think, is part of what's brought you to FIRST. He has a long list of awards that he's gotten, and the one that I thought he'd want me to mention most was the being named the Outstanding Young Engineering Graduate of UT. And those of us in the FIRST community still think of him as quite a young engineer. At the end of the panel here, we have a great pleasure, an old friend, Admiral Bobby Inman, who has an absolutely extraordinary record of service to his country. In addition to having left the service as an admiral, he was head of the National Security Agency, deputy director of the CIA, And I had the great pleasure of getting to know him when he was very active and made a major contribution to the Council on Competitiveness. I was telling him earlier that I'm going to describe him as a Woodrow Wilson in reverse. He did all the public policy, business, ran MCC and Westlake and invests in startups, but now he is a prominent professor at the LBJ School. So shows that it can go both ways. And now it's a great pleasure to someone who I've known by reputation and have admired for her entrepreneurial spirit in the world of education. I still think of her as Dean Marianne Rankin. Until very recently, she was the Dean of the College of Natural Sciences here at the University of Texas. She promoted all kinds of cross-disciplinary approaches to solving problems. I think that's really very much part of the modern world. She built buildings. She raised an awful lot of money, which is clearly one of the responsibilities of deans and presidents of universities. But what really caught my eye is that she had the brilliant idea of saying, instead of trying to get people who want to be teachers to like math and science, why don't we get people who like math and science to be teachers? And she founded the You Teach program. They have been going long enough. They have a real track record. The students of these You Teach professors are doing better. They are staying in the profession longer. It has really been an achievement. And she just mentioned, I had heard recently that LSU now has a You Teach. I don't know if they call it a You Teach program.
They call it Go
Louisiana,
GEO, whatever it is, UX.
But the idea has spread to 28 universities. So again, this is the kind of entrepreneurial, inventing sort of activity, in this case that's institutional, but is also going to have a real impact. Well, I did ask this distinguished panel 3 or 4 questions, and I was just going to start out with a couple of them to get the conversation going. It's hard not to start with FIRST Robotics, having just listened to Dean and, as he put it, the voice of God. I think of FIRST Robotics in part as an example of project-based learning. And I realize, at least from what I've read and people I've talked with, that's becoming of greater interest in the public schools as well. Yet there are a lot of these activities. I think FIRST Robotics is very prominent, but there are some other after-school programs that also can inspire and instruct. Is there a way, panel members, that we can take advantage of the interest and inspiration that comes from, let's say, FIRST Robotics to perhaps inspire the classroom and vice versa, the things in the classroom that might then be amplified by the engagement with FIRST Robotics? I guess we should start with you, Dean Vasquez.
Well, I think the answer is obviously yes. Actually, the You Teach pedagogy that was developed as a part of the You Teach program is all about project-based learning, project-based instruction. And this is not easy to do for a teacher or even for the students at first, because teachers are used to teaching the way they were taught in a lecture format. Students are kind of used to being especially outstanding students, but they're used to being told what's going to be on the test more or less and studying that part and all this stuff. So it's uncomfortable at first to create an atmosphere in a classroom where the teacher is actually like a coach and creating a situation where the students learn almost without understanding that they're learning, but they're learning how to discover answers, how to find things for themselves, how to invent things and create things. That's all about, if you can create that kind of classroom situation, your students will learn more and remember it longer, by an order of magnitude probably, than if you are just lecturing to them. So we try with the You Teach program to teach our students who are going to be teachers how to create those kinds of situations. FIRST Robotics is, it's a fabulous example of how well this can work to engage students in science as well as get them to pursue their own interest and learn it. It's fabulous.
We've had an example with National Instruments, of the impact that business can have on inspiring the next generation of engineers, and an impact on the schools. I'd like all three of you to comment on how you think business, often high-tech businesses, but not only, how they can really be effectively engaged with the public schools. Admiral Linden, start with you.
Ken, as I listen to Marianne and look at your questions, I realize I'm looking at these problems like I looked at the world from way out in space, trying to see a very broad picture and not the precise details. I teach here, but I've not engaged in the classroom. So I've looked at this problem for much of my adult life. How do I find talent? Talent to do very tough jobs. And I had the great good fortune to be involved in the technical collection and analysis side much of my government career. And we were always scrambling to find bright people. Now, 29 years in the private sector, same thing. What drew MCC to Austin, beyond cost of living, quality of life, was the pool of talent being produced. I think I'm probably the oldest person in this room. I'm less than 4 months, I'll be 81. So I have a long memory from the Depression forward, and watching what education did for me for an opportunity, but then worrying increasingly about, I believe the country has lost its focus on education as the ladder for a better life, for better quality of life, for better things you can do for your family and your friends. So will be much more engaged if you turn to questions which talk about this great shortage. Clearly, if we're going to get out of this downward slope, it's going to come from leadership. And clearly demonstrated today, leadership of entities like National Instruments and its incredibly bright, thoughtful leaders are key to it. That's what Council on Competitiveness was trying to do, Business Education Reform. Well, we're slipping still. I don't think we've turned the curve in the positive direction on the issues of public support for public education and for higher education.
Ray?
So in terms of what high-tech companies can do, we try to follow the model of we'll do what we do best. So instead of trying to act like we understand education, which we don't, we've engaged in adapting our technology so that it can be used in project-based learning, whether it's FIRST Robotics after school or it's teaching science and engineering in a way that's fun and exciting. And so I think that's one opportunity for companies is to do what they do best, is take their technology or their expertise and find ways to add value. And that's a good thing, and we're uniquely qualified to do that. Another great opportunity is to support the teachers either in the classroom or as mentors and FIRST with the workforce. One thing that's very difficult for scientists and engineers to do is volunteer in the community in such a way that we're understood. We're an inherently wholesale profession. You see the things we do, but you don't see us. And in order to help create heroes, we can go into these classrooms, not as teachers, but to have to be there for support, because sometimes those computers don't work the way they're supposed to, and have the teacher feel comfortable in these project-based learning situations that, yeah, we'll get it all working. And that's a win-win because, our employees who get to do that think more of us and enjoy their jobs more because they get to give back. And it's hard to give back when you're an engineer or a scientist. You can't just go into the community and start building stuff. There's laws and things that you have to follow. But that's a great way, I think, to do that. And so for me, it's about doing what you do best. And another view that we have, and we got it from Dean at FIRST, is he's really created an environment where all the big companies that compete head-to-head, whether you're in our industry or the medical industry, can work together in FIRST, and he calls it the demilitarized zone, where we can uniquely add value. And that's a place where we can impact education as opposed to trying to do educational reform, which we have no business doing.
Dean Rankin, we've had sort of a call for the kind of public support that was characteristic. You think of the GI Bill, you think of the post-Sputnik era. I actually was a National Defense Foreign Language Fellow, thanks to the National Defense Education Act. That we're now seeing certainly higher education priced in a way that really makes it less accessible to lots of potentially promising people. At the same time, it's my sense that the high technology companies in particular have a vision that includes not only the next generation of engineers, but also the next generation of well-trained technically people. How do we put these two together? Better public support that's more effectively partnering with the kind of thing that the public sector may not do well, but that NI and other businesses can do very well.
Well, I think one of the most heartening things I've seen in the last 6 or 7 years is that corporations, not just the high-tech ones, but others that you would not necessarily think of as directly drawing from the high-tech sector, are getting more committed and interested in making a difference in education. And it's about the whole spectrum of needing STEM-educated workers, as well as needing to train people and inspire people to actually go into professional science and become inventors or creators, engineers, whatever. And I think more and more there's a general awareness across the country in the corporate sector as well as in the private sector that we have a real crisis here, and we need to figure out and work together and make a commitment to make a difference. But I think part of the problem is people don't know how to be effective. And so you see a lot still of this, of pilot programs and small things that feel good or look good or whatever, make a difference to a small number of people and students, whatever, but don't really affect the overall national picture. But ExxonMobil is a great example of one that made a commitment to work with Tom Luce to create the National Math and Science Initiative, which I'm now with, to try to take programs to scale nationally and really make a difference. I mean, this commitment that National Instruments has made to FIRST, and this tremendous movement of FIRST is a great example of things going to scale that are really going to change the country. So I think, yeah, there's a great role here. There are many roles for companies, but it's exciting to see some of them stepping up to really try to change the future of the country in a systematic and intelligent way.
One of the things we learned at the Wilson Center as we started to look at STEM education and education is that some of the programs that were having a great deal of success, and I think as an example of the Knowledge is Power program, had, at least to my eye, adopted something like a Japanese structure for education. That is longer school days, high expectations, frequently Saturday classes. They didn't have that 3-month period where people could, I actually did work in the harvest, but most people don't. And that they would break up the summer so people wouldn't slip back. I think you can see that many middle-class families, in a way, have their children on a Japanese-type schedule anyway. They're doing something enriching after school. There's something on the weekends. They're sent off to computer camp in the summer. And yet, in many cases, the children that need it the most and are themselves filled with potential don't have that opportunity. And I talked to Ray, who said he'd talked to a series of experts about the Japanese model. Is that what we need to do? We need that kind of institutional change here for K through 12 education?
Well, I'll comment on the discussion I had with Ken on this. The term that comes to mind is sensei, which is it's a cultural issue. just like Dean said, where the teachers, the sensei in Japan, are viewed as heroes, just like the lawyers, the doctors, or whomever. They're highly respected. So it's really a difference in culture, I think, across the board that allows a deeper commitment, and they have that. So
I'd like to. This is not K through 12. It's at the University of Texas a few years back. But we did, for years and years, students coming into UT were counseled by our staff advisors and faculty as well, I think, and certainly by their peers, not to take too heavy a load at first. Take 12 hours, especially if you're taking any science, because God forbid you should take 2 labs or something, or calculus and chemistry or whatever. So the kids would take 12 hours, and if you do the math, you find out that 12 hours a semester for 8 semesters doesn't get you to graduation at the end of 4 years. Well, so we did a study in the College of Natural Sciences, and Larry Faulkner actually did a follow-on with the university as a whole. And what we found out, we looked at students across all levels of entering SAT scores and paper credentials and so on. And we looked at their grade point average and their years to graduation and whether or not they graduated at all, whether they were retained in the college that they began in, and so on. And by all measures, across all student levels, students do better if they take a heavier load. I mean, there's a limit. Obviously, you can't take 21 hours and not have some consequences. And if you're working, you've got to accommodate that. But 16 to 18 hours was a dramatic peak in the achievements and success of students. Kids need to be engaged in the work they're supposed to be doing, and then when they are, I think they have less time to go out and get in trouble, and they stay focused, and they stay more interested and connected, I think. So anyway, yes, I think the Japanese model has a lot to recommend it.
Admiral?
I get frustrated with the focus on making sure everybody's happy or entertained. For me, the issue is, are they learning? Are they being productive? Will they be productive citizens as adults? I didn't work on a farm, but I stacked grocery shelves and pumped gas, things back before they were automated gas pumps. A work ethic. Imbued and sustained throughout an adult life as well. I went to college when I was 15 with the veterans coming back from World War II. And I saw what the GI Bill did in dramatically expanding the capacity of the country and putting us on the path to accelerated economic growth. And then as they moved on to graduate school. When we brought MCC to Austin, looking for that pool of talent, the university included as part of the package $750,000 a year for 10 years for grant aid for graduate students in computer science, electrical engineering. Graduating class in the spring of 85, over half were from other countries. And many of them, because of immigration restrictions, were going back to build those economies, not ours. That fall, 18,500 grant, all the empty seats were filled by U.S. graduate students drawn from all over the country with GREs 200 points above those of the previous entering years. So no great question for me. Grants, the brightest students might borrow money to get a baccalaureate degree. They weren't going to pursue graduate studies and borrow more money in large percentage of cases, issue a grant. So I'm circling back around to national priorities. To what degree do we value education, and particularly the cutting edge of pushing the frontiers of science and technology? I've been a trustee at Caltech for 21 years. Love the place, all I learned from them process. But I was preaching the same thing of we need to get more U.S. graduate students, and huge resistance from the faculty. They wanted the brightest graduate students to help push the frontiers of their research. They didn't care what their nationality was. And the reality was that over those years when I hadn't been watching, the quality of U.S. students available had been declining while those from other countries had been going up. And that's why a large percentage of the graduate students admitted were from other countries, and still are.
I was thinking of your comment about sustained work, and there's a phrase that may still be used in Japan: pass with 4, fail with 5. 4 hours of sleep you pass, 5 hours you fail.
26.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you all have been very patient, hopefully inspired. Let's turn to your questions now. And please identify, we have mics coming around, and please identify yourself. Is there a first question? I've always have a long list of questions in my pocket. Jeff, please. We have a mic coming right here.
Jeff Kodowski. What can we do to improve the prestige of a teaching career? It seems to me that's a missing piece. We can inspire kids and so on, but we need to get more recognition and prestige for the teacher.
Let me start at that, if I may, and then pass it on to those much more experienced. This is what I was really referring to in the coming out of small towns in East Texas. Teachers were the best educated people in those small cities of 3,500 to 6,000 people. GI Bill did a wonderful thing for us, but the downside was that 4 years later, the car dealers, the bankers, all had college degrees, going the rest of it, and the prestige of the teachers began to decline. Women still stayed, best ones, because other professions weren't open. And then fast forward 15 years, accounting opens up, then law, and increasingly many of the bright ones shifted to different professions. So you had this combination of broadening the base. They no longer automatically had the prestige from being better educated. But also they began to have the semblance that also maybe they weren't the most competent. We had great good luck for our youngsters going through education systems of getting great teachers who inspired them. Not all. And we'd go make a fuss. Parental engagement in the process plays a lot in what kind of recognition and support for teachers occur overall. I could go on for a long time, but I'll stop and give my colleagues a chance.
Well, I think we need to educate. I mean, this is what you teach us all about. Taking people who really know the discipline and inspiring them to be teachers. And when you have an individual like that, a person who knows that they know what they're doing and is well-trained and is mentored by really strong teachers, which is also part of the You Teach program, they understand their own worth, and to a certain extent, I think they command respect because of that. I think a lot of times you're treated the way you expect to be treated. Not always, and obviously circumstances can be really difficult, but I think this is a big piece of it, to train students as a part of their training to expect a certain type of environment and work to create it and respect. But, you know, also, I mean, we've got a situation in the country right now with high-stakes tests and judgment based on outcomes of high-stakes tests that drive our teaching profession and school setups and in ways we never intended. I mean, you need to understand how well your school is doing and how well the teaching is going, but you also need to understand how to use that that kind of information in a positive way, not to drive teaching into drill and drill to then teach to the test and this sort of thing, and not to blame teachers and blame schools for problems that are very complex and have many many causes. So I think there needs to be, and there is coming to be, I think, national recognition that there's not just one way to judge teaching or judge schools or judge student learning, but we need a sort of a multiplicity of approaches. And the focus now on project-based instruction instead of drilling and teaching to the test, which is led at the very highest level from the President's office. Carl Wyman, Nobel laureate in physics, is doing research in this area and proselytizing all over the country. So, I think there's a growing awareness of the role of the teacher, the role of the importance of real discipline training for teachers, but also the fact that school environments and school situations, school administration needs a different approach to creating a better learning environment. And that, I think, will result in more respect for the whole system and the teachers.
Right. A thought comes to mind that, when you ask most people if they are critical of the education system, they'll often say, yeah, the education system is broke, except at my school, where my kids are getting a very good education. I think that points to the fact that the prestige issue is a local issue, and it's about whether the teachers like what they're doing, they're engaged, as Dean Rankin was saying, and whether the administration supports that. And there are great examples of that. I've listened to some of the UTeach graduates attack this problem of balancing project-based learning with teaching to the test, and they just eat it for breakfast. They love it. They have no problem making that work and getting their kids to pass those tests and also learn a lot through their project-based learning. So I think it's a local issue, and when it's done properly, and we have many great examples here in Austin through the Texas High School Project and putting UTeach teachers in there, and it works, and the prestige is there.
We try to make a real big deal of our UTeach graduates through all their years, and when they graduate, we make a big deal of them at graduation and so on. I think that's, and that's what all of our replication sites are doing too, and I think that's going to have its impact.
Yeah, but
please identify yourself.
Steve Seidman, Texas State University. But it's still far too true in Texas and in other states that when you look at small school systems, the ones we try to place our teachers in, science and math teachers, that too many schools, too many systems, when they're looking for a science teacher, would still prefer to hire a coach who can also teach science.
Makes me think of my first algebra teacher.
Yeah.
When I was working with Kent, Council on Competitiveness, we were trying to understand the problems of not finding enough competent employees. And the parallel also in the Business Higher Education Forum, same issue. So we engaged Public Agenda to try to help us understand the problem. And what we found, Jeff, this really comes back to your question as well. The public said the problem with public schools is no discipline. Administrators said too many layers of bureaucracy and they won't let us do our jobs. The teacher said, we're doing a great job, just get out of the way and let us build the classrooms. And the students said, it's boring and it's unrelated to our interest in the world and what we want to do. And I'm still struggling 20 years later. How can you get those 4 different communities to come to some common view on the whole range of challenge? It isn't just a single cure. And I don't do anything to diminish the you teach, the first, all these things that are very exciting models. But until we can draw together a broad public consensus that reaches down to the local schools as well, rebuilding. At the end of a long depression, education was the way out of poverty and broadly supported in the households as well as the school. We've lost that in the process, I'm afraid.
We have another recession.
Well, we may be headed there.
Yeah. One of the most daunting things that happened to me as we were developing UTeach was about 5 or 6 years into it, when we first started to have graduates. There was a convention of state superintendents of education in Austin, and Larry Faulkner arranged. It was being held at UT as part of the UT facilities. In fact, I think it was, well, maybe it was. Oh, no, it doesn't matter if it was here, but anyway, Larry arranged for me to speak to them about UTeach, and we had just started to realize that districts don't and schools don't do a very good job of recruiting good teachers. They come onto campus in June. Companies are here in October of the previous fall and in February recruiting students. And here we had really strong math and science students who were being recruited by companies but who were trained to teach. And yet the districts weren't even telling them what assignment they might get until the middle of the summer even. So I decided, okay, I was just discovering this, so I stood up and I told them about UTeach and the wonderful students we had, and I said, I want to work with you. I think we could work together so that you could get in here when the companies do and do a better job of recruiting these students, and we would really love to work with you to do that because we want them placed in where they're needed, and especially in high-need schools. And one of the superintendents stood up and said, he didn't say little lady, but that's the tone of voice he had, something like, thank you very much, but we don't really care about having the very best math and science students as teachers. He says, we want teachers who will do what they're told and go where they're told to go and teach them the classes we want them to teach in. But the worst thing was the whole room applauded. That was an eye-opener for me. So I sat down. Larry Faulkner says, well, now you know what the problem is. And yeah, so, there are pieces of this system that it's hard for us to get our hands around, that it's broken in a number of ways. But superintendents have a real tough job to do. They have limited budgets, and they have to, they might want to save money by getting the coach to teach biology or math or whatever because they'd only have so much money. And as Dean just told us, what's the most important thing? It's the football team, so anyway.
I will just add that technology does have a role to play in the short term to augment. The reality is there are going to be football coaches teaching math and science. And there's no question that technology exists to supplement it in a way that you can have a very engaging math or science or engineering lesson in the high school. And we're trying to adapt our products to make it possible that when you do have that situation, you can still make it interesting and exciting. I mean, if you think of the amount of effort that goes into like producing a movie, and if you made the curriculum for math that exciting, a football teacher could teach it. It wouldn't be as good as having one of Dean Rankin's graduates, but it wouldn't be so bad. There is one anecdotal story I'll give you. There's a robotics program here in Austin that was started by the former basketball coach. And I think he's teaching like 6 sections now, 6 years later, and has one of the most competitive first teams in Austin. So it can be done.
There was a question, a gentleman in the back.
I'm Stephen Mercer of National Instruments. You keep mentioning several times education as the way out of poverty. Over the last few months, I've been engaged in a few discussions with people with the Occupy Wall Street movement. And if you read a lot of their testimonials, we are the 99%. There's 2 themes that keep coming up, and that's the problem of healthcare cost and education cost. And I'm curious what your thoughts would be on their argument that as valuable as education is, and as critical as it is, that the cost of a bachelor's degree outweighs that benefit at this point in time, and what we should be doing about it.
Why is it that expensive? It's that expensive because priorities have shifted. If you go back when I brought MCC to Austin, 42% of the cost of the university was paid out of general revenue. It's now down to 11%. That's happened not only for higher education, but for public education. Shift in priorities, downgrading investment across education, and shifting the cost. I don't think I would have been, I started junior college because of cost, and then managed to be here the last 2 years. I don't think my parents would have sent me here in 1948 had tuition been at the level it is now. But it's a shift of priorities at the local, state, federal level as you try to deal with competing budget priorities to downgrade the value of education and the investment. I'm on a little campaign that's probably going to go nowhere, but that says if it's a public university, at least 25% of its cost should be underwritten from general revenues. Just flat, but you need a floor in this process rather than the continuing downward shift in the process. I am not thrilled about paying taxes. I am thrilled that I can now make enough money to need to pay taxes in the process. I am prepared to pay more taxes as long as it's fair and equitable. But if it's being used to advance the prospect of the future for my grandchildren and for their friends in the prospect. So we have to turn around this whole approach of how we manage to balance budgets is by reducing the investment level by the state in both public and higher education.
Any thoughts about reducing the costs of education in addition to greater public support?
Well, you know, one of the ways to do that is to use technology, I think. Yeah. And we were engaged in this at UT and the College of Natural Sciences. We were really just starting to get into it and try to understand what the possibilities might be. But for example, the enrollment in the college was going up, and in the university, and we were maxing out in terms of capacity and for some of our entry-level lecture courses and even the labs and so on. And so we're looking at how to let students do parts or even all of the courses from their bedroom or, you know, someplace not in a seat in a classroom. And you know, there's some really interesting, innovative ways to use that. And we need to be more engaged in that and more entrepreneurial about it, I think.
This raises the question about, is the virtual university of the future, or is it a hybrid model? Well, there are virtual high schools now, or there are hybrid models where there's some classroom and some online. Is that really the future?
Inman's view, separate conveying knowledge and learning critical thinking in the process. Mm-hmm. You can convey knowledge as easily online as you certainly can in a 400-student classroom. And you need ways to monitor to make sure that it's really being done, the process that gets to the testing and the rest that you set up to do. But when it comes to critical thinking about that knowledge, how to use that knowledge, you need that interaction of small classes and the teachers, professors with it. So there isn't a single, you know, go online and do it all and just produce 81,000 degrees of what use, as compared to how do you find that mix. We're under-investing in the community college, junior college area for those who don't need to go on for advanced degrees, but who in this modern era need the technical skills to be productive, employable immediately. And we need to track in to higher education for those who are going to go on, where critical thinking becomes an absolute certain feature for what are they going to create. How are we going to incentivize, how are we going to get them to think about being innovative? And I would argue that is a critical thinking skill.
I really agree. I think, you know, there are a lot of things that can work very well online. And in fact, if it's set up properly with coaches and monitoring the use and so on, so you know the kids are really doing what they're supposed to be doing and that sort of thing, it can work well. But the way you get kids really engaged in science and in engineering and in technology and creativity is to let them get their hands on it. Project-based instruction, again, this kind of thing that Dean was talking about with FIRST. And it's hard to do that online. I mean, there are ways to coach kids online to get them engaged to a certain extent, but there's no substitute for really small class, real engagement.
We have really passed our witching hour, but we'll take one last question, and then I'm going to have give a mini editorial of my own.
Wonderful. Rudy Reyna with UT San Antonio with the Texas Pre-Freshman Engineering Program, a summer STEM program for middle and high school kids across the state. PBL question. How, when you look at UTeach, and it sounds like you have an emphasis in that area, have the faculty themselves necessarily adapted that process so that when they're teaching teachers, they're actually using that, and how well has that progressed? Number one. Number two, if we were going to inject more formal PBL into our program in the summer, what would you recommend as a process or resources and so forth? And number three, do we have enough information now, research, or has that proceeded to be able to understand the effectiveness of PBL?
Yes, we do. I'll answer your last question first. There's a number of studies. In fact, one that was just published a couple months ago, maybe 3 months ago now, in Science, with Carl Wyman as one of the authors, that really did a very nice demonstration. But this was just one of a long series where he actually had a very highly experienced physics instructor who'd won lots of accolades and awards, teaching a physics course by the lecture format, and a less experienced but a younger person, but who had been trained in project-based instruction, teaching the same module to another segment of that same class where everything was exactly balanced. And then they gave the kids tests afterwards and measured the amount of learning and retention. And the two curves for the two classes were non-overlapping. So the one that got the lecture format was over here, and the kids retained about, I don't know, something like 20% of the information, and the other curve started up here, and they retained about 80%. So it was a dramatic difference, and that's only one of a number of studies. So yes, so your first question was PBL. Yes, I want to introduce. Is Harry still here? Yes, Harry Lucas back here started a program at UT in math. Focused on inquiry-based learning, which has transformed the College of Natural Sciences teaching. I wouldn't say everybody's using it, but Harry started getting people to return to this kind of teaching where the instructor is more of a coach that sets up a learning environment and the students are able to discover the answers for themselves. When we started UTeach, we used that, and it informed what we did, and obviously we got very much into project-based instruction. We try to teach the UTeach students in courses, not totally, but as much as possible, using those methods, and we've designed some especially for that. And then, of course, they are taught how to use it themselves. But more and more, that's taking over the kind of teaching that everybody in the college tries to do. It's hard to do it in a large format lecture, but people are being trained. Harry's given us support for many years now, coaching professors in how to use this kind of instruction, even in a 500-student lecture course. And it's really been extremely good. I will say it also resulted in the development of what I think is a totally transformative program where students are engaged in research from their freshman year, called the Freshman Research Initiative that we started at UT Austin. That's a whole nother story, but it is a tremendous program that changes students' lives and the direction of their careers, I think, in much the same way UTeach did. Letting them try real research in the freshman year instead of just canned labs and this kind of thing. So they learn the thrill of discovery and engagement in a research program, and it really changes their trajectory into professional science and engineering. So anyway, yes, I think this is great. Did I answer the middle question? Oh, resources, I think I can talk to you later about that, or
just
point you to
a very brief comment by Harry Lucas, who
very briefly, thank you, Mary Ann, and let me just say, as a retired entrepreneur, not a diplomat, but the second oldest person here, I think. This has been, in my last 15 years of working this IBL project, the R.L. Moore method, this has been one of the best meetings and discussions that I think I've ever seen. And I'll just focus on one point that Admiral Inman made about critical thinking. 60 years ago, when I registered right here at UT, I was a fairly good student because when I wanted to make a good grade, all I did was memorize things. When I got into Dr. Moore's class, I began to see that he gave us problems that were difficult. We couldn't look them up, we couldn't discuss them, we couldn't use the internet then. No way to get the answer except sit quietly in a room, like Pascal said. Sit quietly in a room alone and try to solve the problem. So after several years of that, I had a little success, but I won't go into that long story and just conclude by this, that Dr. Moore started this in Texas in 1920. He had an extremely good record in his students. There are people in this room that are descended from students of students of students of Dr. Moore. So when you talk about where innovation can be started, particularly in mathematics, we have a good case history right here at Texas. And the second thing I was going to say was, Mary Ann talked about corporations supporting education and what it takes to get education reform done. Well, Dr. Norman Hackerman told me when I first started this project 15 years ago that education was very, very slow. And I found it to be true. But we have our assessments. We're 15 years, 5 years behind our principal speaker here. And by the way, we agree with everything that was said about project-based instruction. The difference with mathematics is very, very small compared to what he has been doing. But there is a role for the individual. That's my concluding remark. It doesn't take a big corporation necessarily. Each one of you in this room here can probably fashion some kind of a project-based component or inquiry-based learning into what you're doing, or have influence on the institution you work with. So good luck to all of you. There are a few entrepreneurs around, and some of us, like Jeff, have a little money left. Thank you.
Well, let me just say
Make an editorial.
Oh, indeed you may.
First, to compliment the Woodrow Wilson School for the Woodrow Wilson Center, for their interest in this topic, for sponsoring this event, but hopefully continuing to push on it.
That's our hope.
And the thought, as I listen, how do we shine spotlights on the good things that are happening? This was the first time I'd ever heard about FIRST today.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of other things. There's a wonderful program at Texas State run by Max Warshak on MathWorks. Again, these are innovative, successful programs that if we could get, we mostly read about everything that's wrong. And maybe if we could get some spotlight shining on the things that are working constructively, that it'll help build support for people to say, oh, it is worth investing. There are good things.
I thoroughly agree with that, and that's very mumuch our intent going forward. And so I remember Dean Rankin was also saying that instead of, let's say, singling out a group of teachers that are failing, let's single out the many teachers that are succeeding and focus on how they're succeeding and how we can spread that message to others. I did just want to say in concluding that as a warning for us, 10 years ago, we had the highest percentage of four-year college graduates, 10 years ago. Fast forward to today, we're now number 8 in the world. It's not that we haven't improved a little bit. We have. Others have improved at a much more rapid pace. Dean mentioned that Americans don't like to go into a contest saying we're number 2. Well, if you look at our standing on the program of international student assessment on math and science, we're in the mid-20s. Not everybody. We have wonderful schools. We have the kind of models that we ought to spotlight, but we have some troubled schools as well. And when on the technology front, if the demographers are true, are right, that we're going to have 2 billion more people by 2050, we already still have $2 billion people living on $2 a day or less in the world. If we want to bring them and the 2 billion to come up to what we think is an acceptable level of living, we're going to have an enormous technological revolution in water, in food, in energy, and in shelter. And I think that kind of challenge, maybe because of the Great Recession that Jeff referred to, we will find people refocusing on the kind of fundamentals that really took off after Sputnik, which was another shock to the country. And one of the great strengths of America is that resilience and a kind of national, decentralized entrepreneurial spirit. So I remain optimistic, but optimism is not enough. It's really time to roll up the other sleeve. Well, thank you for coming. We, the Wilson Center, absolutely plan to do more of this in the future. Thanks to National Instruments, who co-sponsor this, and to the LBJ School. We'd love to partner again and partner with others as well. So please join me in a round of applause for this outstanding and insightful panel.